another episode of Health Check with me, Malasim Abdullahi. So this topic today is very close to home. Worldwide, it is estimated that 1.3 to 4 million cases are reported each year, and 21,000 to 14,300 cases are reported yearly. That is according to WHO. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about cholera. We know it so well, but how well do we know cholera? To help me with this discussion is my guest, Dr. Karibu. Kindly introduce yourself to the viewers.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you to all our viewers for tuning into the show. My name is Dr. Muhammad Ali Omar. I am currently an intern, just started this year. I graduated last year from the University of Nairobi. And I'm also grateful to the station for inviting me to present about this topic that is currently causing havoc, especially within the city of Nairobi and within our country. And I just want to be able to educate our viewers just a bit more on the disease of cholera, so that we can be able to take precautionary measures so as to be able to prevent it. Thank you once again.
So thank you for coming and welcome. What is cholera?
So basically, cholera is a disease that has been with us for thousands of centuries. If you go back in history, before even the time of Jesus Christ, Isa alayhi salam, cholera has been reported to have been there in areas even in India. In very basic terms, cholera is a bacterial infection. It is caused by a certain bacteria that is called Vibrio cholerae. Vibrio cholerae, there are other different kinds of strains, and this disease, basically what it does is, once the bacteria gets into the system, it causes a person to have profuse watery diarrhea that can cause certain signs and symptoms, and even in the worst case scenarios, lead to death. So cholera is something that has been with us for a very long time. It is well known to us, and it comes on and off severally, and currently we are in the situation that we are in because of Vibrio cholerae, the bacteria. That is the Latin term for the bacteria.
Why is it that when it has been there and all that time, nothing has yet been done to eradicate it completely?
Okay, with eradication of bacteria, as you know, it takes a long time to eradicate. I think one of the success stories in the world is with smallpox, which has been completely eradicated. I think we are on the way to eradicate polio, although it's a bit present in certain countries like Nigeria and Pakistan. A few reported cases here and there. The thing with the Vibrio cholerae is that there are different strains that occur. And once a strain has been treated, you can have it mutated to another different strain that's still causing the disease. But also, one of the major things why we've not been able to eradicate it is because of the environment in which we live in. Generally, cholera is associated with environments which are unclean, or areas whereby the stool and water sources are not well separated. Therefore, that's why we've not been able to eradicate it thus far.
So basically, it's just maintaining cleanliness at home.
I would say 90% to 95% of the times, cholera can be eradicated in areas because of maintaining cleanliness. In fact, if you look at the WHO statistics, as you said, when it was being introduced, was in certain areas of the world, cholera is no longer there in the developed nations. Why? Because of the environment that they've been able to create. A clean environment in terms of the water sources, in terms of the food sources, in terms of the sanitation that is available. Unfortunately, currently in the world, if you look at the epidemiology, is a lot of the cases of cholera are currently located or localized within sub-Saharan Africa especially, and the Asian continent, Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh. That's where they're located. And this is because of highly populated dense areas with poor sanitation, and again back to the main thing, which is water. That's why. But in other areas, like in the US, in Europe, in Canada, there are very rare cases. In fact, it's very surprising for someone to have cholera in that area.
And where is it that the moment someone realizes they have cholera, you find within hours of realizing someone has cholera, they die?
Okay, and the thing is, cholera in its presentation, it has sometimes very non-specific presentation. Sometimes it has a very specific presentation. So we have a kind of a spectrum whereby people will confuse it with, diarrhea can be caused by several different things. There are different other kinds of bacteria that can cause it. You could just have, basic food poisoning that is self-resolving basically. With time, it's going to be able to resolve. So if someone ingests the bacteria and it gets into your system, the symptoms can present anywhere between a few hours, maybe 1 to 2 hours within ingesting it, to about 5 days. Sometimes that's what happens. And for these particular people, what happens is they might confuse it with other, they think it's going to be self-resolving, and if they do not get medication, what happens is that they succumb to the bacteria.
So what are the symptoms?
Okay, commonly the most common symptom is you have someone with lots of diarrhea. By diarrhea, diarrhea is defined as anything in which you have several episodes of loose watery stools within a day. It can be defined, different definitions will say it's more than 200 milliliters per day. Some will say several episodes more than 3 to 4 times, and it also is dependent on the consistency of the stool. Now there's a classical presentation of diarrhea, which is like the rice water stool. By rice water, I mean for those of us who are proficient with cooking rice, when you boil rice, the water that remains is this whitish colorish water that is there. That is the classical presentation of diarrhea. Other people will not have that presentation. But more importantly, you're going to have really watery diarrhea with very easily formed stools that are there. Some people will present with vomiting, generally of clear fluids. Then there are complications that occur, including renal failure, depending on the extent of the loss of water from the body. And in the worst case scenario, obviously, you're going to have death. Rarely, very rarely, I would say that you're going to have a person with cholera presenting with fever. If someone has fever, you generally want to tend to think about other causes before thinking of cholera. But if someone doesn't have fever, they have this really watery diarrhea, then you generally want to think about cholera.
Someone once told me that the reason why the diarrhea resembles the rice water is because the bacteria eats the intestine. How true is that?
Okay, I would want to beg to differ with that because if you actually look at the pathology of the cholera or the Vibrio cholera that goes within the intestines, most commonly it's found within the small intestine. As you very well know, we have the small intestine and the large intestine, or the colon as it's commonly known. So the bacteria is going to produce a certain kind of toxin, which is called the cholera toxin. And then this toxin has different parts. And one of these parts is going to attach onto the surface of the villi, or the surface of the intestinal mucosa. Therefore, it's going to cause a mechanism which is going to be able to increase the amount of fluids which is within the body to be removed from the system of the body within the intestines, and thus you have the watery diarrhea. Then what happens is, even if you're able to release this, the mechanisms whereby the water within the lumen can be reabsorbed back into the system. However, these mechanisms are also going to be hindered. So when you say that it eats up the intestinal bacteria, the intestinal wall, my apologies, is I would want to differ with that because of the pathology in which it is able to do it. Actually, if you look at it, the pathology of cholera is in such a way that the bacteria itself is not as dangerous. What kills people is the dehydration. So the loss of water and the electrolytes, which is the sodium, potassium within the system, is what actually kills the patient.
So in case someone has all these symptoms and they are far away from health facilities, is there first aid, or for lack of a better word, first aid measures that can be taken before they are taken to a health specialist?
Exactly, very good question. The thing is, in our country, despite the progress we've made in healthcare and generally in sub-Saharan Africa and in other parts of the world that are still considered to be underdeveloped, is that we have people who access to healthcare is a bit difficult, especially people who live far away from urban centers. As I earlier mentioned, is that the most important thing in an infection of cholera is that you have dehydration or loss of water. So the important thing is to be able to regain this water. Now what happens is not only water and also electrolytes that have been lost. So there is something called ORS, which is oral rehydration salts. If the patient is not vomiting and is able to take in the oral rehydration salts, that would be a good place to start. Even if they do not have access to oral rehydration salts, the important thing is to be able to regain the fluids. So you can take boiled water or water which is clean because you do not know exactly what caused it, and then you can add some bit of salt and sugar so as to be able to increase the amount of...
In case you don't have the ORS.
In case you don't have ORS. Water which is clean, ideally boiled or treated with chlorine. You add some bit of salt and sugar, and then you just keep on drinking. But the thing is, the reason why I would want people as soon as possible to go and look for a health practitioner is number one, because there are other bacteria that present with features similar to cholera. So you could think that you have cholera and you're self-medicating, but there's something that you actually have. That's one, because even when you come to the hospital or to the facility or to any practicing medical practitioner, there's the high suspicion that they have of cholera. For example, what's going on in the news, etc. But they have to confirm it via a stool test to show that it is actually cholera, and the thing that you're treating is cholera, not something else. That's one. Two is the amount of fluid loss. If you're very severely dehydrated, even when you come to the health facility, we're not going to start you on oral salt or oral rehydration. What we're going to do is we're going to put in the intravenous line, and we're going to rehydrate you via certain fluid using your venous system until you get out of that severe dehydrating phase.
You find, yes, someone has cholera, which has been discovered, so taking care of that person so that the next person who is taking care of the sick person should not get infected as well. Yes,
so for that, what happens is whoever comes into contact with that person, because the mode of spread of cholera is mostly by fecal-oral or via contaminated food or water. What happens is the most important thing is for you to wash your hands and to clean them appropriately. By cleaning the hands, make sure that in between the knuckles and in all the different parts of your hand, you're able to clean them appropriately. That's very important. Some people will advocate for vaccines. There's a cholera
there is a vaccine for cholera.
Yes, there are 3 different kinds of vaccines. However, currently they're still being worked on. What happens with these 3 different kinds of vaccines is that they're effective for about a period of 6 months to 2 years based on different studies. So you can take them, but you still come down back to the basics, which is hygiene. Make sure that your hands are clean, make sure that the food that you're taking is well cooked, make sure that the water that you're taking is boiled, treated with chlorine, make sure that the food that you're eating is covered, because what you have sometimes is flies which go and get onto
the food.
Yes, onto the food, and they can spread. That's a mode of spread. So clean hands, very, very important for this patient.
So does the vaccine goes only for those who have had cholera, or anyone can take the vaccine?
It is not recommended for anyone to take the vaccine. For example, I would not expect patients or people or citizens in countries whereby there are very rare cases of cholera to take the vaccine. It is really generally not recommended. But in areas which are highly endemic for such a cholera, you can have something called herd vaccination, whereby everyone in the community or like children can be vaccinated. However, if you look at the cost-benefit ratio, sometimes it's much more cheaper for you to maintain hygiene, make sure that there's clean water, rather than spending thousands and millions of shillings in purchasing the vaccine. So look at the cost-benefit ratio. If you can be able to afford it, you can take it. But the protection is around 6 to 12 months. So 6 months to around 2 years. But I would personally recommend hygiene, 1, 2, 3.
And how far are we with eradicating it, like completely?
With eradication, it all depends on us. If we say that we are going to maintain cleanliness and hygiene, it can be eradicated, within a short period of time. However, because of the high population areas that we have that are very densely populated with it called poor sanitation mechanisms and poor, water. The drinking water mixes with the sewage water, for example. Sometimes in some areas, it will be quite difficult to eradicate it. So that's the dilemma that is even facing, the policymakers as it is currently. But hopefully, I believe that as we continue as a nation to become more developed, and we have more people getting out of, the very the real poverty, we'll be able to eradicate it.
After all that, there have been news making headlines on our TVs, newspapers. Cholera broke out in one of the finest hotels in the country. So people are wondering why.
As you understand, is well, I cannot speak for the hotel personally because I don't work there.
Yeah.
But the general mechanisms is that the water sources sometimes are the same for that's one. Two is that probably the people who are catering for that particular area would have got the food from a certain place, whereby one of the people who was the cooks or serving etc. could have been involved or could have had an infection of cholera that was ongoing. Probably they could be in the incubation phase. As I said, you can have symptoms occurring anywhere between 2 hours to 5 days. But I really do not want to speculate on that. As you can see, it's affecting both the poor and the rich, as it is currently in our country. And it is just for us, to maintain cleanliness, hygiene, wherever it is, wherever you go, whether it's, the large hotels, the large areas, down to the, kibanda where you have mama mboga cooking for you. Make sure that your hands are clean, you wash the vegetables that you eat and the fruits, make sure that they're peeled nicely and they're washed and are quite clean. The water that you're drinking is boiled or, it's chlorinated. Those are the important prevention mechanisms.
Is it okay? The question I had asked earlier, but is it contagious?
Contagious. What I would say is, if you come into contact with someone who has cholera, there's a high chance that you can actually be able to get the cholera, either because of a spread of the bacteria from to the food that you're eating. For example, if their hands are not clean and they've come from the bathroom and did not clean themselves well, and they share the same food with you, there's a chance that you could get it. In fact, if you come to the hospital, what is recommended is once you are undergoing treatment, whether anyone else in your family or someone else you had a meal with has similar symptoms, then they also have to be brought in and they have to be treated appropriately. But when you say it's contagious, it's not like TB whereby if someone coughs, that there's a chance that you're going to get it. But if basically the bacteria that is lodged within this person's in small intestines comes into contact somehow and gets into your gastrointestinal system, then there's a very good chance that you will also become sick.
So there are some people, today I am sick, I get medicine, then halfway through I don't finish my dosage. How dangerous is it for someone who's suffering from cholera?
Okay, so as I earlier mentioned, the most important treatment in management of cholera is rehydration of the patient. But you can also add antibiotics. Certain antibiotics such as doxycycline, tetracycline have been shown to be better. Generally, the course is quite short. It can be anywhere from 3 days to 5 days, depending on how the symptomatology of the patient is and how they're able to react to the medication. Within this 3-day period, mostly patients who are admitted in hospital, it's good if they finish their dose within the hospital because the medication is actually given intravenously, especially something like doxycycline. So they finish their amount of the dosage within the hospital. So once they finish, then they are allowed to go home. But on a similar note, not only for cholera but other several bacteria, what happens is when someone has an infection, they buy medication, then once the symptoms reduce, what happens is they stop taking the medication.
Yeah.
Now what happens with this is the bacteria can become resistant to that particular antibiotic, and next time when they come back, you cannot use the same antibiotic because something else. I know for some time we can only go for so long because the number of antibiotics that we have are limited, and the ability to develop new antibiotics takes quite a bit of time, starting from the stage of discovery up to the market stage. So I would recommend and advise to make sure that people actually finish their dosages so that they do not get diseases which are resistant to all antibiotics, and then you cannot find anything to treat them, which is unfortunate. We are heading at some point we'll probably reach there because of how we are playing around with our antibiotics.
So you had mentioned earlier that there is a vaccine. So that like 3 stages. Okay. Within the usage of vaccine, who is administered the vaccine?
Okay, for the vaccine, what we currently recommend is for people who are traveling from non-endemic areas, for example, tourists who are coming from other places or travelers coming to endemic areas. If there's a currently ongoing an epidemic within that particular region, then they can take the vaccine. That's one. Two is people who have, like you have a community whereby there is a large number of people who are affected or infected with cholera, and there's a good chance that everyone else could probably get it, especially like young babies or young children. Then you can give the vaccine so as to be able to suppress the content or of the bacteria that is within that particular population. But that again is quite expensive. Mostly I would say that it is recommended to tourists, travelers who are coming to areas in which there's an ongoing epidemic and they're worried and they just want to be cautious and prevent against cholera.
So after how long does cholera leave the system?
It's quite very short-lived. Within a very short time, it resolves. Especially with patients who get the appropriate treatment within a period of 3 to 5 days. Ideally, all the symptoms should reduce. The diarrhea should stop, or there should be very few episodes of the diarrhea. The dehydration should reduce. They should be able to start eating again. You should be able to start walking again. Now, the worst thing is if there are complications like renal failure. In that case, what happens is the patient could, in worst case scenarios, have to start undergoing dialysis, and that may take some time. But those are the very severe and rare cases. But within a short period of time, within 1 week, the patient should be able to go back to their daily routine.
So cholera can cause renal failure?
Yes.
So in a layman's language, what is renal failure?
Okay, renal failure, basically, renal comes from the word kidney. So kidneys, sometimes they have different functions in the body. What happens is the function that they do is to excrete the waste products and to at least help the balance of the water and electrolytes within the body. Now then, it's its own specialty on its own. In nephrology, that's the work that they do. But in very basic terms, there are 3 different kinds of renal failure. There's what is called pre-renal failure, renal failure, and post-renal failure, dependent on where the problem is. Pre means before the kidneys, renal means within the kidneys, post means after the kidneys. So any of these different causes can lead to kidney failure. Now with cholera, because of the large amounts of dehydration that occurs within the body, it causes pre-renal failure. And for this pre-renal failure, what happens is the kidneys do not get enough circulation going towards them, and then this can lead to the shutdown of the kidneys and reduction in the functionality of the kidneys. Now, over time, what happens is if the kidneys do not gain back their own function, you have to help them up to a certain point, and that's what dialysis does basically, in removing the waste products. But those are quite severe cases. I hope I'm a bit clear.
Has it ever reached to that stage where the kidney fails?
There are some cases that I've read that have occurred. Personally, I have managed a few patients, very few, who have had that kind of presentation. I would say at most maybe 1 or 2 that when it comes to memory. It's quite rare. We generally don't want it to reach that level. and you want to catch it before it reaches that level. But not to worry anyone who's watching. Once you get any symptomatology and you get the classical presentation or very profuse watery diarrhea, I would advise you to go as soon as possible to your practitioner or your physician or to a healthcare facility, and you can be able to get the adequate care that you deserve.
On maintenance part, how expensive is it when it comes to treating cholera?
Okay. So you look at in terms of the cost.
The medicines, the time that it is dedicated, and all that.
Thank you. As I was saying, with expenses depends on the severity. For patients who have less severe diarrhea, what happens is you can allow the patients home on oral rehydration salts. Oral rehydration salts are not that expensive. I do not know the exact amount of cost, but they're widely available. That's one. Obviously, for patients who have severe cases, what happens is you need to admit. Now, depending on the hospital that you go to, there's bed charges, there's physician charges, there's the fluid that you have to go in and give the patient, there's the antibiotic that you have to give the patient. For the most severe cases, you have patients who have to undergo dialysis, renal failure, etc. So the cost is depending on how you come in. That's how I would say I would evaluate it. So it's really hard to pinpoint and say that the management of cholera will cost 3,000 shillings. I think that would be wrong for me to say that. As we said, currently as a nation, we are facing a problem with cholera, and if you can be able to see anyone who has cholera or presents with such features that we have described in this particular segment, then please, as soon as possible, get the appropriate care. Do not stay at home saying that it might just be basic food poisoning which is going to resolve, so that to prevent the severity of the disease.
Another thing that I left out that is I feel it's very important. You feel someone has cholera, but they don't want to come out that I've had cholera before because they feel it's embarrassing. What can you tell people out there?
It is something that is with us. We cannot refuse that. It is something that exists both in the different spectra of society, from the high upper classes of society to the lower classes of society. From my own perspective as a doctor, there is patient-doctor confidentiality, so I cannot reveal that a particular person, like my colleague here, has cholera. It is unethical for me. Now it's upon that particular person to reveal whether or not they have been treated for cholera. But what we can do is, as healthcare practitioners, as public health officers in the country, as people who are responsible towards society, is be able to educate people on cholera, what causes it, how to prevent it. That is really, really very important. But it is very unfair of me to go into the media and the press and say that a particular patient of mine had cholera. I think it's unethical because of the patient-doctor confidentiality. You really do not know how. You really do not know. You really don't have to know about person X or person Y who has had cholera to be able to treat yourself. It doesn't matter. But the important thing is, treat cholera. When you feel that you have the symptoms, you know about the symptoms now. If you feel like there's a member of the family who has no idea about this particular thing, then I think you could advise them to seek health care from the registered practitioners, and then they will get the appropriate care. But it's not really important for me to say person X or person Y had cholera.
So someone should not shy. Okay, the stigma that follows after the treatment. Yeah, that was what I was asking.
Oh, okay. Well, for any diseases that we have this in the world, the thousands of diseases. Obviously, there is the stigma that is associated with particular diseases like HIV/AIDS or TB. But currently, as it is, you will see that we are moving towards a society that is becoming more educated and less stigmatized, I would say. We still have a very large, significant population within the country that stigmatizes people with these particular diseases, and I think it's unfair to them because it will also happen to you. And if you continue stigmatizing them, what happens is people will not seek the appropriate health care, and that prevents people from, or us being able to eradicate the disease, which is quite unfair. So in a general broad term, regardless of whether it's cholera or HIV/AIDS or TB or diabetes, you name it, do not stigmatize a patient or do not stigmatize a person, because you could also become
a victim
or you could become a victim. So it's very unfair. We are quite advanced in terms of the healthcare that we have locally and internationally. So certain diseases can be treated. Certain diseases, the continuability of the disease can be curtailed. So let us stop stigmatization, especially within our community, the Muslim community. It's very unfair to stigmatize people, because that prevents the healthcare seeking behavior of individuals with these particular diseases.
Okay, so any advice for people out there, how to take care of their houses and all that?
In terms of what happens is, remember, always maintain cleanliness. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, cleanliness is half of your religion. That's one of the hadiths of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Extremely very important. Make sure that you clean your hands before you eat, after you eat, after you go to the bathroom or to the washroom. Make sure that your hands are clean as appropriate. When you are cooking food, make sure that the vegetables, the fruits are cleaned very nicely. Even what's it called? When you are washing the vegetables, make sure that you wash them, because the people who just pour water on vegetables and say that is clean, but that is not right. In terms of the water that we are drinking, boil the water, add chlorine if you cannot be able to boil the water, drink clean water. In terms of sanitation, do not go to if you need to go for a long haul, make sure that you go to a place that is far away from the drinking area or the drinking source of water. It's a bit far, especially in our rural areas. You have people who have a well, and then the bathroom is quite
just
near.
close by.
Yes, it's advised that at least they should be more than 10 meters apart, because there's a chance that, especially when it rains, that they can mix. And then aside from that, if you have any symptoms that you feel resemble what you've discussed earlier, then please, as soon as possible, please seek health care. Once you go to the healthcare practitioner, they can take a stool test. If you have cholera confirmed, do not worry, there is treatment for that. If it is not cholera, something else, then there is also treatment for that. Then the respective physicians can be able to take care of that.
So, just quickly, the difference between, you've already told us cholera, but someone else will be like, no, it's just food poisoning. So are the symptoms similar?
Yes, symptoms can sometimes be similar. As I said, there's a spectrum. There are patients who present with less severe cases of diarrhea that are not as severe as the classical rice water, stools, or vomiting. So for those patients, they just might wish it away and say that this is food poisoning. But with the current prevailing conditions or environment that we have, if it happens like you eat at a place which is different from your normal routine, like you go outside to a place with some friends or family, and you have a meal, and several of you at the same time present with such similar conditions, then there's a likelihood that you could probably have cholera. So you just go to the physician, and you can easily be tested for that. I think that would be helpful. Better that it is not cholera than thinking that it is not cholera and it turns out to be cholera. So let us confirm it objectively in the hospitals, and then we can tell you that this is cholera or this is not cholera. Other than that, I think they can have similar presentations, but always let us try to be precautious so as to be able to prevent the worst outcome. Okay, with regards to whether children or old people are going to be more affected, what happens is, so long as you ingest or you eat the food or you drink the water that has any of these particular issues or the bacteria, there's a chance that you're going to get it. Now, in terms of how severe it is going to be, obviously in patients who have lower immune system that can fight off the bacteria, you could probably have a worse presentation. For example, in younger children, there's a much larger chance that they're going to become dehydrated much more faster than an adult male who's probably 40 or 50 years old. Or the elderly people who do not take in as much, fluids and etc. Once they become infected, there's a higher chance that they're going to become much more dehydrated faster than someone who is fit and running and doing everything in their daily lives. So anyone can become infected and get cholera. But in terms of how severe it is, depending on the individual people, you can have people that present it differently. For example, I have seen cases whereby we eat a meal together, it's the same meal, but some people become infected, some do not become infected. So we really do not know why, but is it because of one person having a higher immune response than the other people? But in terms of how severe it is, probably there's some patient groups who are going to become or present with much more severe form of cholera than others. And then I can also advise that it's important that people get insurance, especially the national insurance, NHIF, National Hospital Insurance Fund. You pay, I think, 500 shillings per month, and it covers for you several things when you or your dependents become sick. What happens is, in the current society that we have, is patients, someone becomes sick, and they have to always go and fundraise. So before they actually raise the money to come to the hospital, it's quite a long time that they have spent out there in terms of what we could have been able to be doing at the hospital. So 500 shillings is something we can all try to get. And then you can be able to get the care that you need once any of your family becomes sick from cholera or any other diseases that exist.
So, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah.
And I hope also our viewers have learned something new today. And next time that they have any questions on cholera, you can actually send in questions, and I can answer them on the next segment.
So it is as simple as that, maintaining cleanliness at home and everywhere that you live. Remember, cleanliness is close to godliness. You have been watching Health Check with me, Malasen Abdullahi. Until next time, stay safe.